Welcome back, everyone who was in the last panel. For everyone who wasn't in the last panel, we had a chat about the implementation of design thinking in organizations and the overall business design context. And we looked at this from a perspective of leads and managers in large corporations. Now we want to look at the same topic, but this time we're going to look at it from a research perspective. And we are going to have a presentation and gain insights into a study on implementation practices of design thinking in large organizations from two people who are warmly welcome on stage now. Professor Dr. Falk, Uebernickel, Professor for Design Thinking and Innovation Research at HPI, and Dr. Daniele Di Paula, Senior Researcher at HPI. Please give them a warm welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction and for being here. So today we have a tough program looking at a lot of data. Therefore, I appreciate very much your attendance here. So as I've said, or as we have said in the beginning, we're talking about design thinking and practice, and together with me on stage is Dr. Daniele Di Paula. She is working at HPI even longer than I, because I joined in 2019, and you are here since 2017?
2018.
18. And Daniele is postdoc, so working on her habilitation in innovation management and design thinking. And unfortunately not with us is Stefanie Gerken, as you can see on the slide behind me. She is the main author of the study, but since she moved on in her career and working at Deloitte, she couldn't make it today being here, but nevertheless she is with us in all of our minds and in all the data here. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? Basically, it all started a couple of years ago with a study that became very famous in 2015, and it was done by also famous colleagues, namely Jan Schmiedgen, Holger Rino, Eva Köpken, and the famous Christoph Meiner, because they, as you have heard today, they did a lot of design thinking in the past, but not just doing it was important to them, but also investigating how it sticks to organization and how it sticks to people. And therefore, they started a large-scale study in 2014, so many years ago, and they came up with a study called Parts Without a Whole. And they published this study 2015, and it gave, I believe, as one of the first studies and the only comprehensive study, so to say, a full comprehensive overview of what design thinking is and how it's being implemented in the market. And in 2019, I was somehow in the transition between my old university and HPI. I thought, why not doing it again, right? So innovation is not just doing things entirely new, but sometimes innovation is also just doing the same stuff again and maybe improving it and even identifying new insights. And we thought it's interesting to look into a new study or a kind of new study because in between 2015 and when we started thinking about it in 2019, we saw a lot of different press articles about design thinking. And you know all the good ones, right, who praise design thinking as something that is the new big thing. But at the same time, there were also other authors in the market, and they publish at Forbes and at HBR and New York Times and whatsoever. And they said, no, it's a big fad, so it will disappear. If not today, but tomorrow definitely. So they really said that there is an end to come, and it will be there soon. So and we got curious as researchers, not just as convinced design thinkers, but we got curious as researchers and wanted to know, is that true? Or where's the middle ground? So what is the status quo, basically? And we just wanted to do something that relies and is based on the study of Holger and Jan, but with a new perspective and with fresh data. And that's basically the result. So we made it, and I think some of the books are there. Maybe Daniele, you can just hold it up. So we have 3 copies here. If you're fast enough, you can grab one at the end. Else, you can download it for free. So already some orientation points. But at the time in 2015, I think we didn't know as much as we knew in 2020 and 21. So we started to look at the framework again, and Ella Wolf, a former master student of mine, she came up with this graphic on the right-hand side, basically differentiating design thinking into different compartments like strategy, training development, organization, and anchoring. So where is it positioned? We thought looking into the teams, process and tools, culture, leadership, impact measurement, and salary. And this resulted and accumulated into a survey and a questionnaire, and we reached out to 581 individuals. So those are the qualified individuals that we reached out. And then in addition to it, we also had 23 expert interviews challenging the data that we saw. A bit afterwards, we realized that we forgot one other important thing. That was basically the last domain, salary. Because we realized people also want to know, okay, how much do you get paid, right? Am I average? Am I the peak, right? Or am I getting underpaid? And therefore, we started another survey with 918 subjects, and those subjects attended one open HPI class that I was conducting. So we reached out to them, and we asked them about their salary and some other qualifying questions. So all the salary-related data that we will look into today are coming from that second survey. So those are most probably different people. There might be some overlap between the first survey and the second survey, but we cannot guarantee because all the data are anonymized and we cannot trace them back, basically. So this is basically about the method. So it took quite a while to collect all the data to look through. And Daniele is now going to talk about some of the charts, and I might add here and there some of my wisdom too. So Daniele.
Thank you, Falk. So let's start with the first chart. So please let me guide you through the chart. If you look at the XY axis, you will see the years. So the first thing that we wanted to learn from our respondents was, when did they start introducing design thinking in their department? So following up with what Falk mentioned, that there was this big debate about whether design thinking is dying or not dying, we really wanted to understand, okay, who is doing design thinking? When did they start it? And are they still doing it? So then a second question that we had was, when did the organization discontinue design thinking? So if you look at the graph, you have the blue line, which is the introduction. So when design thinking was adopted in the department. And the yellowish, greenish line is the discontinuation numbers. So how many organizations discontinue using design thinking. And now let's look at what the graph is telling us. So if you can see that in the blue line, there is a growth in an adoption. So the fallacy of the design thinking is dying. Based on our data, it's not really confirmed. So there is more and more organizations implementing design thinking, and whereas the discontinuation number, as you can see in the yellow line, is small. And this leads to very interesting insights when we look at why these organizations, they discontinue using design thinking. The first reason that came from our analysis was that there was the wrong understanding about what design thinking is. And there was a wrong understanding about what is the value, what is the benefits that design thinking brings to these organizations. And this was the main reason why they discontinued. And when we look at the blue line, so the growth in the adoption, this also leads to interesting insights. So we have seen more and more organizations talking about how to measure design thinking, how to implement design thinking properly. And these are very interesting insights that we can learn from our data, that there is a growth, there is an interest, organizations are implementing it, and now comes the question of how can we actually measure it, how can we actually do it properly. Now let me guide you through a second chart, which is, we got very curious to understand what are exactly the departments that are implementing design thinking. So in the previous chart, I told you that organizations there is a growth in an adoption, but where exactly is this happening in organizations? And here, we ask them in which areas of your organization has design thinking been applied and will be applied in 2023. So we wanted to know now, and we wanted to know in the future, so we could compare which departments had the most promising interest in implementing design thinking. And maybe let's have a look at what the chart is telling us. So the blue bar is 2023, so the future, and the yellow bar is 2021, so when we applied the survey. And it's interesting to see that research and development is quite prominent in implementing design thinking. And when we look into the future, it seems that it continues to be stable. So design thinking, our data indicates that it's very important for the research and development department. What is also very interesting to look at is information technology. So information technology is now starting to pick up with the R&D department, and this leads to very interesting sites because we now are seeing more and more companies being interested in creating solutions, creating digital solutions that provide a good experience to the user, that also accounts for usability aspects, for what is exactly the solution that we are going to deliver to the client, to the user. And this is one very interesting insight that comes when we look at the data from information technology. Another insight that I would like to point out in this chart is operations in manufacturing. As you can see, there is also a big growth happening there. That our participants indicated that in the future, design thinking will become more relevant even than it is now for operations in manufacturing. And that's also very interesting, especially considering that here we also have projects with corporate partners, and one corporate partner that came to us several times with the project is BMW, and with the challenge that they came to us is really related to manufacturing, so how to use design thinking to improve internal processes, so the car manufacturing, how to improve the processes of the car production. Considering, of course, the needs of the workers, considering the feasibility, considering the technology. And it's very interesting to see that manufacturing companies, they are really growing interest in design thinking. Now let's go to the next chart. So now that you know that there is a growth in adoption and what are the departments that where design thinking is growing the most, we wanted to understand how exactly are they implementing design thinking. Because as you all know, design thinking has different understandings. There are different ways of implementing it. And then we asked our respondents, in your organization, is design thinking implemented more as a process or as a holistic approach? And let me explain. By holistic approach, we mean that more than just a process. So design thinking is really in the mindset of the employees, really in the mindset of the team. And then we also ask them, what is the total number of employees in your organization? Because we wanted to correlate those numbers. So what kind, depending on the company size, how exactly are they implementing design thinking? And now let's have a look at the graph. So the x-axis is showing the answers, and the y is showing the company size. So micro, small, medium, and large organizations. And here it's very interesting to see that the micro-organizations, they mostly implement design thinking as a holistic approach. And whereas in large organizations, it mostly as a process. So here we can interpret that when the micro-organizations is much more easier to implement a mindset than to actually change the mindset of an entire organization or parts of the organization. So the rollout of design thinking on a large scale is very challenging. And there is a lot that large organizations can learn from micro-organizations on how to create this mindset change. So now let's have a look at the next chart. So we want now to understand what leads to success. How design thinking implementation is successful? What needs to be there for that to happen? And then we ask our participants, did the organization have a specific goal for adopting design thinking? And the reasoning behind this question was because we had our hypothesis that strategy is a big indicator of success, that having a strategy underlying your design thinking implementation increase the chances, increase the likelihood of having a successful implementation. So in this question, we wanted to actually test this hypothesis that we had learned from experience with research and with practice. And then the second question was, how successful is the organization at using and implementing design thinking? Of course, we wanted to know how successful the respondents perceive the implementation. Now let's have a look at the chart. So on the x-axis, we see from very unsuccessful to very successful. So this is a Likert scale. And then on the y, we see the answers of our respondents. So the blue line is the yes, we are successful, and no is no, we don't think that it's successful. And the M bars, it's the median of those answers. So that means that everything that it's on the left side is the same as everything that it's on the right side in terms of numbers, so 50-50. Now let's have a look at what the chart is saying. So the chart is telling us, if you look at the blue median, so the blue line, those organizations that had a strategy underlying design thinking implementation, they are more to the right side. So that means that they have the perception of the implementation of being more successful than those in the yellowish line. If you compare, the yellowish line is more in the direction of very unsuccessful. And now let's have a look at what are the insights that this can bring to us. This data contributes to the discussion about this grassroots movement. So there is a lot of discussion about whether design thinking implementation should start as a grassroots movement or as a top-down approach. What is the best way, what's the ideal way of design thinking implementation to start? And here we can see that once you have a strategy, your chances of success are higher. So you can start as doing a grassroots movement while having a strategy. Or you can start as a more top-down approach while having a strategy. The main message here of this chart is that you can be successful if you start without a strategy, because we can see here in the data that some companies, they consider themselves to be successful even though they didn't have a strategy, so it is possible. But the likelihood of getting successful gets higher once you have a strategy underlying your implementation. Okay, and now let's go to the next graph. Then we wanted to understand what exactly is a design thinking expert. What does it take for you to become a design thinking expert? I think if you ask this question to many people, each one of us might have a completely different answer.
I see also a lot of people, and you know, I was personally also very interested into that question, because we all, as educators and coaches, we see people holding up their certificates, which is great, and they deserve it, and they have achieved a lot of things. But one of the questions was, does it really make you an expert? Right? So does it make you tomorrow be the one who can strongly lead teams? And I mean, here amongst us, there are some very experienced coaches, right? And I mean, it's one thing if we tell them what the truth is, or it's another thing if we ask the community. And I mean, if you look here at the number set, it's so all participants gave us answers on them. It's quite interesting what the finding is. And if you look at the chart, we basically depicted on the x-axis the years of experience that someone has. And we asked that question in one part of the questionnaire, in one corner, let's say. Yeah. And then we asked them in the other corner of the questionnaire, okay, how do you assess yourself in regard to the skill level, and we gave them 4 possibilities of answer. Being a beginner, an intermediate, advanced, and expert. So expert, the guru, right? And what that chart tells you, if you put it then together, this colorful thing, if you now look together with me on the lower left corner, right, you see the 64%. So all the numbers in that column of the beginners should add up to 100. So of all the beginners who claimed themselves beginners, they said 64% said, we did design thinking less than 1 year. Yeah? And 30% said, okay, we're still beginner, we do it since 1 to 2 years. So that's the way how you read it. If you then go with me to the cell with the 53, it's also a dark blue cell, right? It's basically a number that says, okay, we estimate ourselves being advanced, so not already expert, but advanced. And 53% say, okay, we do it in 3 to 5 years. As you see, there's 1%, so 1 or 2 people who said, okay, we are advanced and we are in the field since 1 year. That might be true. Yeah? I mean, there are such people who have crazy experience and they got very immersed into this methodology, and they some people are talents, right? So they really might be the expert. But what we see from the data is that it takes a decent amount of time to climb up that ladder of experience that is also here collected in this room, right? So you need to work a lot of time in order to experience what design thinking means. And it gets a bit scattered on the expert level. So here it's a bit harder to say when someone is an expert. And I think this also depends with the amount of projects you have done, basically. But what you can see here that definitely more than 60% say, okay, you need to have at least 6 years of experience. And then you can somehow think in that direction. And I mean, why is that important? I mean, if you're trying to implement design thinking in your organization, you might also want to build up clusters internally who have the capability and the skills and the knowledge, right? And if you are now trying to hire people, you also want to have this variety of skill sets from maybe beginners and intermediates up to experts. And I think that guide can help you to somehow select or find more indicators what makes an expert and who is eventually claiming being an expert, but probably not. Yeah. So it might help you as an organization to staff your people right and to find the right experts. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you, Falk. And now maybe let's go to the next chart. So we wanted, with this chart, we wanted to understand who are the employees in the organization who had heard of design thinking. Because now we are talking about design thinking, the adoption is growing. Great. We know what it takes to be a design thinking expert, how long it takes, according to our data. But now the question was, how many people in the organization should know design thinking, should implement design thinking? Does it need to be in the entire organization, parts of it? What exactly are we looking at? And that was the rationale behind this question. So we asked our respondents, what is the percentage of employees in your organization who had heard of design thinking? And then once again, these lines, the aim line is the median. And let's have a look at, for example, the median for large organizations. So if you look at the blue line, so the strongest blue line, the dark blue, the line is around 30%. So 30%, according to our data, around 30% of employees in organizations have heard about design thinking. So this is, and when you look at, for example, at micro, it's more tending, it's around 80%, almost 80%, so much higher, which is also linked to what I've said before, that micro-organizations, they are smaller, and then it's obviously that this number would be bigger compared to large organizations.
Maybe just referring to Uwe, when I see you, you said before that you trained roughly 25,000 employees in your organization. And I mean, if you compare this with the numbers here, I mean, it's not 30%, definitely not, but or it seems to be also a large number, 25,000, but it's not, right? It's most probably needed to have that support for the people who are acting out design thinking, which Daniele will talk in a second. But if you plan training programs, the numbers that also been set by Uli, that you got asked training 10,000 people per year, I mean, these are realistic numbers. It's what you really need in order to have a fruitful environment. And it's not just enough to have 2 or 3 people around who knows about design thinking, and all the others are just waiting that miracles happen. They don't happen. So people need to become onboarded on that journey. And here we are not talking about that they are experts or kind of experts or that they use it every day. No, most probably not. Yeah. But if someone is asking them with the vocabulary of design thinking on certain things, or when it comes to interacting with design thinking minded teams, they need to know what that is, right? It cannot be just a big question mark in their eyes. Yeah? And therefore, it's an interesting number, up to 30%. And if you put this in context with a large organization, 100,000 employees, yeah, it's maybe somewhere between 20 and 30,000 should run through such a program. Yeah.
So now let's have a look at how many employees actually use design thinking on a regular basis. So in the previous chart was employees who had heard about design thinking. Now who is actually using it? And then if you have a look again at the dark blue, so for the median line, for the large organizations, this number is around 10%. While when we look at the micro-organizations, this number is around 30%. So this confirms with what we were thinking, that not everybody needs to actually be using it on a regular basis. It's important that they know that it exists, they know that it's a possibility, but those who actually need to use it on a regular basis, it's according to our data around 10%. All right, so since we are talking about design thinking usage, how exactly can we train the employees? How exactly organizations can support their employees to go in this journey and learning design thinking, become a design thinking expert? So then we asked our respondents, how did they learn about design thinking? What kind of channel they used to learn design thinking? And here you have the blue bar, it's 2021, so the year that we applied the survey, and 2015 is the yellowish bar, which was the results from the previous study. And here we compare what has changed from 2015 to 2020. Now let's have a look at the results. Here you can see that educational institution is still the leading channel where our respondents go to, where employees go to learn about design thinking. And here another interesting insight is when you look at external agency consultancies, this number is also growing. And but the number compared to educational institution, it's still much larger than compared to that. And this also speaks to why we are here and why many of you as well have gone to the D-School, to the HPI Academy, and so on, because it's also in alignment with our data that educational institutions are still the most used way for employees or for interested people to learn about design thinking, how to implement design thinking. Okay. And now comes to the question of the salary. So as Falk mentioned, we were really interested, okay, what is the salary that people working with design thinking earn? How much do they earn? And first we ask according to different sectors. So manufacturing, financial and insurance activities, other service activities, professional, scientific, and technical activities, and information and communication. So as you can see here in the chart, the manufacturing company, the manufacturing sectors are the ones who pay design thinkers the most. So around 90K. This is in dollar. And then this is followed by financial and insurance activities. And then we also got curious to say, okay, how is these numbers actually related to the experience? Is this 90K the salary regardless of your experience with design thinking? That we got really curious about it, and that's why we compared the salary with the expertise level and also with the gender. So here you can see that a design thinker as a beginner, the average salary is $75,000. But there is a gap, if you go with me to the last two columns of the table, between the salary that men receives and the salary that women receive. Here we can see a gap from 80,000 to 65,000. And this is also illustrated in all the next levels that you see here. So intermediate, advanced, and expert. The salary change, the salary increase, as you can see, but also the gap. The gap is also there. And this is something that we as a community, we need to pay attention to, and we need to be aware that this is happening.
Maybe one fun fact, we looked also at countries, and there was one country that was really peaking out. It's our south neighbor, so Switzerland. So they pay much more. So the salary structure is entirely different here. Yeah, so I mean, with such a study, it's difficult to harmonize this. So we gave them in the beginning a kind of intro what we think it is, but we were not able to get out of them, out of the 918, their individual perceptions. But we asked them if they work in the field of design thinking, what they basically earn. Regardless, so we didn't look into what their specific role is. So everyone who deals with it, because at least from my experience, it's sometimes also a bit fluffy. Sometimes people lead teams, but at the same time they are coaches, and it's not that monolithic job profile in most of the situations. Yeah, but I mean, maybe you don't use it. I mean, you are not anyway, but you don't use it as a bargain argument for your next salary. But it's I think a good orientation frame, right? That gives you kind of an impression what's out there at the current moment. And those numbers are, let's say, pre-corona figures, pre-Ukraine war figures. So there might be some changes here and there happening right now because of the current economic situations.
Exactly. And
Okay.
now let's look at what's coming next, Falk.
Exactly. So therefore, I need the remote control. So as I said, we also conducted some qualitative interviews with the participants, and we heard today a lot of what is the next frontier. And one of the frontiers that all of us are working on is mindset change and how we can enable people to transform and to keep up with the pace of transformation. Therefore, I will not talk about this here because I think that's anyway the theme of the conference. But what we were interested in was what comes next beyond product design levels. And I think there is one graphic that is really, kind of inspiring to me at least, which is from Buchanan. I'm not sure if you know this gentleman, but he's a professor at Case Western, a very famous, one of the earlier authors about design thinking and design. And he said in 2001 already, so we are talking about 21 years ago, that there are different horizons of the application of design. And they depend on the complexity of things that we are looking at. So no matter if it's products, processes, etc. And I think the first two horizons of design, I'm talking here about communications, objects, and artifacts, I mean, they're pretty clear, and I think that is also the first movement that happened with design thinking. So everyone was looking into product design, into making things more usable, no matter if it's a remote control, we know these examples, or the Apple mouse that we heard about, or the shopping cart. All these examples are basically from this complexity realm number 2, so object and artifacts. And as you all know, this is where we didn't stop. So we went beyond this. And some of our folks invented tools like customer journey and persona maps. And basically, all these inventions led to a new domain of complexity. And we all learned that it's not just enough to have a good designed product that looks nice and fancy, but that we need to design experiences and interactions between each other, between the product and us, and that we also need to understand how entire product flow needs to look like. And this led to this third realm of complexity called interaction and experience design. But what we're seeing nowadays is that at least the leading companies are now trying to conquer the fourth realm, and that's the realm of systems. And maybe I can ask you the question, why did I put Patagonia here on that chart? Can someone imagine why I make the example of Patagonia for being excellent on systems design?
I would make a guess, since today the CEO put like the
Recent news, yeah.
the company shares into a student-owned company.
Yeah.
So he basically designed the whole system of the company and kind of get like new motivation and created or embedded the purpose of the company within the company structure itself.
Yeah.
Really interesting, I think.
Excellent. Yeah. So, but this happened right now. But even before, why is Patagonia so interesting from an organizational perspective? What do you think? What do they stand for? What are they producing? Outdoor hiking, right? Yeah. And what makes them special? So, okay, sustainability. So why sustainability? Yeah. So there's a specific target group from the beginning on, like the 1970s when they started. But what is even more special about them in regard to sustainability?
Maybe you speak about the repair system.
Yeah.
So basically that you can repair, like you can send in your clothes when there's something wrong with it and they repair it for you.
Yeah, exactly. So Patagonia, to make a long story short, and maybe afterwards you can read about them. And I don't want to promote any kind of things from Patagonia, but it's really a good example. So they learned from the beginning on to design themselves as a system, inside an ecosystem. So they didn't just look at themselves as an organization, but as a player in a circular economy, even when no one was talking about circular. So they looked at themselves as a player in a larger system that fulfills higher goals for the society and not just commercial goals as an organization. So they got this point super duper early because of the founder, but also of the many believers who are working in that organization. And Patagonia is, I think, the sparking example for an organization who designs entire systems. And I'm not talking about IT systems. I know I'm here at the digital engineering faculty as well, and I'm a member of them. But here I'm talking about ecosystem design. And I think this is the next frontier that we all need to tackle. And I would like to take together with Daniele 2 examples with me. So why is that useful? Because first of all, because of sustainability. I mean, everyone is talking about climate change, about sustainability issues, and yes, it's happening. It's on a dramatically pace happening. But unfortunately, and this is just my personal opinion, we are all at the moment just looking at technology. We're waiting on new products that solve our problems. But no one is anticipating that we, here. You and I are part of that game as well. We are 50% of that equation too. So pure technology will not help if we are not changing too. And especially if you look at sustainability, you then need to add also all the supply chain partners and the ecosystem partners in that equation too. And here, system design will help us in the future to look at us as individuals, but also as organizations entirely different. And that will affect everyone. So it's not just the sustainability industry, but it's food, it's electricity, it's everyone who needs to anticipate themselves as a player in a larger game in order to achieve the goals that has been set by the UN. So it's not enough to look at yourself. And I think another example, and Daniele is talking about it in a second, is digital health, right?
Yes, another example is digital health. So we live now in a world that healthcare needs to become more and more connected, that healthcare needs to become more and more personalized. And in the context of design thinking, in the context of thinking as a system, digital health is an area that really deserves our attention. And especially if we look at the numbers of chronic diseases, they are flying at the moment, they are really in the peak. And to address chronic diseases, if we look from a preventive perspective, it's really about behavioral change. It's really about changing your lifestyles. But as you all know, behavioral change takes time. How many of you have already tried to create a new habit or to change a habit? It's pain and it takes time. So then this area of behavioral change, lifestyle, connected healthcare, improving patient and doctor communication, how they can be more connected, this is an area that really deserves our attention. That really deserves that we see the patient, the user, in its entire ecosystem. So it's not just about the user, it's where the user is, the context that the user is in. Because we interact with each other, we interact with other people. And when we interact with each other, we are influenced by that. This influences our motivations, this influences our behaviors. The environment is also influencing our behavior. So how can we create solutions? How can we investigate the problems in a way that it contextualizes the user and take into consideration the entire ecosystem of the user? So not just the user, but everything that it's affecting it. These are questions that we see it as being as the new frontier where design thinking will go to.
Okay, so to sum it up, and then we move into the Q&A, we see still a race of design thinking in organization. I think it's by far not the end. I mean, if you look at Germany at least, there's a lot of potential where we need to apply it. But what you also learned is a strategy is a good advice, even if it's a grassroots movement. And I'm a big supporter of grassroots. But what helps in addition on top of it is to have this clear guidance. There's still some success with grassroots, but it comes just better if you have a strategy. Then building up the expertise takes time. I mean, we know that, but from the data we know it really takes time. So 6 to 8 years is the number for the expert level. And then by looking at the number of people who need to be exposed, roughly 30% for the large organizations, which is a big ballpark, so this is not a small number, in order to support the ones who are then actively daily working with it. So this is also a call for educators that we cannot stop here. I think there are many, many more people need to be exposed with the method, with the knowledge, not necessarily becoming the expert. And we need to push this to a system level. So at the end, some faces that I need to show and want to show, because as you can imagine, and I said this in the beginning, it was not just Daniele and me and Stephanie, but also more people were involved technically and data-like. That's the first column, but we also got strong financial support. I mean, as you can imagine, such a fancy report came not out of my pen. So there were other people needed, like Anja and Tim, who helped us, and Christoph Meine and Markus Kölling gave us the financial support here. Okay, so let's discuss, and I hope we provoked some questions, some curious questions. So we will be the moderator, and if there are online questions, I'm now looking to the camera, which is moving, then you will help us as well. So are there any questions? Yeah, Gerhard. Okay, so there's obviously a mic.
All right, there's Mike. Hey, thank you. So the question is, for the study you were doing, was that in Germany, DACH, Europe, worldwide, or where did the people come from?
Yeah, so it was an international one because it was so difficult to control, and that's also the reason why it's not an A publication. Because usually you would need to have an association that kind of frames the number of participants, but since this is not really existent on a global level, we just shot out some posts at LinkedIn and through other social media channel, and we invited people over a time span of 3 months to take part of it. So in that regard, it is not fully solid, but at least it gives, I think, because also of the number of people, kind of gut feelings. Yeah.
Can I just add that even though the survey was international, most of the respondents, they come from the DACH region.
Yeah.
Thank you. So my question is, in your perspective, how does design thinking education has to change to, or maybe has to change, to better integrate the looking at the fourth dimension, so on the systems level?
Good question. So yeah, I mean, if you look back at the system level, I think what's definitely needed is interdisciplinary work, and I mean, this has been preached and done at least by us since many years, if not even since the beginning. But nevertheless, if you look at the educational system in Germany and even abroad, I think at university level, high school level, we need to do it more intensively, and we need to value also the different perspectives and opinions of those disciplines. Else we are not able to work on a system level. Yeah, so it's interdisciplinarity in the first place. Yeah. Markus.
Thanks for the.
Oh, Sherif. Please. Okay, maybe Sherif. Yeah.
Yeah, so
and then Markus.
All the really interesting insights. I have a small question. I don't know if it came up in the conversation, but it was quite clear that micro businesses are advancing more than large businesses in this. And I'm just curious as to, is there like a conflict of funding that? Because design thinking is quite expensive. And if it's micro businesses who are more inclined to adopt it more, I'm just wondering, like, did that come up? How do they finance it, or do they find that a problem at all?
Well, other question: why do you think is it expensive? How do you get there?
I mean, the slide you showed with the salaries is not cheap.
It's maybe not cheap, but you save a lot, right? So if you look at from a pure product perspective, the total cost for developing a product, since it's iterative, since we are prototyping a lot, since we fail very early in the development process instead of at the end, I think it saves a lot of money. And there's even research, not necessarily about design thinking, but about the effects of agile methods and how much you can save. So therefore, my argument would be that's a very smart investment and not a cost position. And if you invest that money, you will save a lot at the end with much better products and with less fails at the end. And I mean, I'm a German looking to Germany. If we would apply that in some of our government projects at least, right, I mean, we even would have the potential to succeed, right? And it would save a lot of our taxpayers' money. So therefore, I do not go with it that it's expensive. I think you should not look at it from a cost perspective, but it's an investment, a very smart one.
And there are also academic studies that are trying to prove that design thinking actually leads to a reduction in development time. So there is something that it's ongoing, and there are strong hypotheses in that direction.
Thank you.
And I know, I mean, you had so many students in your classes, and you changed them, right? And I'm damn sure that almost all of them, or even all of them, make an impact. Yeah.
Yeah. This would be a different question in terms of how to measure success of design thinking, if it's lead time, or it's in particular, we already think it's de-risking, and the cost of non-quality or different prioritization, and you are doing the wrong things, probably will not pay off. But my question is, I saw large organizations. So I'm working for a large organization, and you showed very clear on the figures, the larger the organization, the higher the inertia, and the lower the adoption rate. And also you showed a second figure, this link to it. I see that the large organizations are more looking into a process approach, rather the smaller ones see it as a holistic approach. So now my question is, if we now go to an ecosystem, which is even more holistic, dynamic capabilities, all this, you would rather see that than the adoption rate, because on one side you could see it as a larger organization, so it will be lower, or would it help because we come into a more holistic approach, that the figures in terms of adopting it, because there's no other way to succeed, will increase? Any figures, or is it the next study?
Well, that's hopefully the next study, Markus, that we do then together, right? Yeah, good question. I mean, it really depends on how the ecosystem is composed of, right? And at the current moment, we see that a lot of large organizations like yours are surrounding themselves with smaller ones, right? And the small ones, they have the ability to be agile, to be human-centered, to have that design thinking mindset embedded. And this might even help you as an organization to realize sooner or later that you change and transform. And I mean, it's happening anyways, because the inflow of new people coming from universities has more and more these capabilities. So it's changing anyways automatically, because institutions like the D-Schools, like the GDTA network, it's me, or is it you? So like the GDTA network, I mean, we are constantly working on it, and I think it will change over the years. Yeah, so there's some effort done by you internally, but some effort is already done by the universities and the educators, and it's changing. Yeah. So I'm not sure, but let's say Flavia, go first.
Daniele, you talked about the success of implementation of design thinking, and I was wondering how you defined success when the people indicated of what's success for them in implementation.
So we asked them, what's your... So the question was based on the perception of success. So how do the respondents perceive success? So we asked them, do you perceive design thinking implementation from your perspective as being successful? And then they answered yes or no. But it's really from their perspective what they understand as being successful.
I think my comment goes in the same direction. So I'm also working for a big corporate company and in manufacturing, so potentially on all slides, more on the left on the x-axis. So it was really interesting to see what kind of way we have to go. I'm first of all not sure if every company understands design thinking in the same way. So if you ask them, do you do design thinking? I don't know what the definition is and how do they act. And it's more like a comment. I see the risk in big corporate companies that they want to go the way, but they're not doing it. An example, yeah, you've got a team of, I don't know, 200 people, and you send one guy to a Scrum course, and he's an agile practitioner after it, and then everybody's saying, yes, my team is doing agile work. But you still continue as you do, or as you've done the last years so far. So don't know how to answer it, but I think it needs a lot of time and implementation, and also professional help from the outside, I think, to change the org structure or processes, not only to have a couple of educated guys in the board or at the company, but really change the minds and the behavior of large corporate companies.
Yeah, I mean, maybe referring to what you said in the beginning, I think we went through a similar phase with everyone is doing it somehow. I remember well when I saw some project charts in 2012, and there was a checkbox asking each project, have you done it, right? And people just did something, right? Kind of online course, or they talked to someone who knows something about design thinking, or they looked at Wikipedia and then they said, yes, check. I think we had this, but I believe it's not happening anymore. So there are way too many people are kind of qualified to look at it. For sure, there are different interpretations, there are different understandings, but even if I believe in one or two types, I still believe that the variety is not so bad, right? Because variety also means innovation of ourselves, because maybe there is a new interpretation of design thinking popping up that's even better than what I know or what we know. So therefore, I think we mitigated this risk a bit with the different interpretations by having a large sample of people answering the survey. And for sure there is a bandwidth, but I believe not all the 581 have 581 or even more definitions. I think there are some common pillars that are now known and set in the market.
Yeah, just to add on that, we also ask our respondents what is their understanding of what design thinking is. So we analyze all the answers and we find patterns, as Falk mentioned, in their answer. And then if you have a look at the book, you will see that we summarize all the answers into the different understandings that our respondents have about design thinking. And we also correlated that their understanding with different aspects of other questions. So for example, strategy. Depending on what kind of strategy the company has, how exactly do they understand, how do exactly they define design thinking. We also played with these two questions.
Okay, so I just got the indication that we somehow need to finish, I guess.
No. We just have, I mean, we still have a couple of minutes,
3
but we
minutes
have
time.
so many questions online.
Okay.
And I've been motivating them to post, and now they're like coming in. So I want to make sure at least some of them are being answered.
Yeah.
So I'll give you 2 questions at once, because I think first one is easy to or quickly to answer. Does the salary comparison reflect an international comparison? And second one, Daniele, in one of the slides, you were talking about 10% need to use design thinking in large companies. What is exactly meant by that? I didn't quite get the point. Also, is there the chance to get the whole paper? I would really like to dig more into your research.
Should I start?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you for the question. So in terms of the 10% number, so as I mentioned, we ask our respondents who is actually using design thinking regularly in the organizations. So 30% was who had heard in the context of large organizations, and 10% was actually who is doing it regularly. They would range from experts to beginners. They had different experiences, but they were using it. They were using it for their jobs, for their daily tasks.
But it's not a recommendation from us. So this is what the participants said, that it's been used with roughly 10% of the people. Yeah.
Yes, so now I guess we have to close, if that's okay. Sorry?
Another question over here.
Yes, the last question.
Thank you. I will try to structure my thoughts as good as possible. I'm Max. Studied design, did a business degree afterwards, just to get like both sides. My thought, or how I experienced design thinking in the past few years, that it's really fuzzy and this kind of more like feeling. And I don't. When I hear like putting this into MoMA, like this is not design thinking to me. To make a bold statement here, I don't want to offend anyone, but I believe in the power of design, and I think in the last few years it became this kind of fuzzy thing, but I definitely support your approach about like putting digital health into it, the system thinking into it. My question is, what can we do to avoid the step of like becoming designed as fuzzy kind of thing that somebody does an online course for 1 week and claims to be a design thinker? And I say, don't get me wrong, like I totally support that, and I think design should be accessible, inclusive, like everybody should get that. But what would be like, when you speak about the next phase of design thinking, what should we do to avoid this? I don't want to say mistake, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we need to talk about avoidance. I mean, it's part of life, right? If something becomes interesting, fancy, if people want to get on board of something, different interpretation starts to pop up, right? I think the only method that will help us is awareness, right? As a group of professionals, we should regularly talk about the different things that happen out there, and we need to try to make sense out of it and need to see the good and maybe the cons or the bad in it, and we need to debate about it. And I think, at least in my case, in the last years, we might have had not enough debate, right? And not enough community space, which is now provided by GDTA, for example, where we start to debate about things, right? And if we start debating, then we can create a collective sense of what is helpful, what is not. I'm not a big fan. I tried this as well many years ago to regulate with even more certificates or with even more tests and whatsoever. But you know, when you get older, you then also learn it would also not help, right? It's just another paper. So therefore, I think it's the debate that we have today and tomorrow amongst us, and we should be open to invite even more people who are interested, right? And the debate will help us to move on and to find our own path, and also to see clear what is good and what is not.
Yeah, just to add on that, I also believe that we shouldn't pick one definition, one interpretation over another. I think it's beautiful that there are different interpretations out there, that we have different views that are also based on our experience and our context, and then we can debate about all those interpretations. And as Falk mentioned, I think the key thing here is really to have awareness. So awareness that these different views, different interpretations, they exist. And I wouldn't pick one over another. I would just be open to see, okay, what are they talking about? What can we learn from it? Do they overlap? Do they contradict? What exactly are we talking about? Just really opening a dialogue and seeing what we can learn from each other's perspective.
Thank you. And
you went with the most complicated question until the end. Thanks so much, the both of you. So many questions, so apparently it was a very inspiring input. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, so there are 3 books here. So whoever wants to have a book, right, just take it.
Okay, you can fight over these or collaborate over the whatever. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
We're about to close the main stage for today. We've had many inspiring panels here on design thinking, impact, what it means, on education and design, on a global scale, on the organizational implementation from a business and research perspective. I think if we look at what we heard in the morning about design thinking, no one knew it in the beginning in 2007. And then we heard how the Global Design Thinking Alliance now enables 400 students worldwide to create innovative solutions in the educational space, and so many large-scale companies have been implementing design thinking successfully. Then I guess we have gained some insight into design thinking impact that is quite impressive. And whoever feels still energetic can go to a film screening, which is taking place next door. The movie is called Why We Are Creative. And the filmmaker went on a tour, interviewed famous people such as David Bowie and Nelson Mandela about why they are creative and how they learn to be creative. There's also going to be a panel at the end of the screening as well. Thanks so much for being with us today. I hope we'll see you back tomorrow. Enjoy your evening.